I'm weeping a bit inside. This is actually kind of fun. I actually did come in here and check out lectures and was quite happy with the fact that we had such a set. Business school has money. We over in arts, we have no money. Okay, all right, let's get going. All right, so brief overview of what we've done so far. We've had a look at some theories of causation, process theories and counterfactual theories. These are by no means the only theories of causation that are out there. I guess they're perhaps two points at opposite ends of a spectrum, right? From sort of the most metaphysically robust accounts where you have sort of stuff smacking into other stuff in the world to something that looks far more conceptual, I would argue, with counterfactuals, right? We had a look at the semantics for counterfactuals and got thoroughly confused thereby. Don't worry too much if you don't get how the semantics for counterfactuals work. I think the central thing to understand is that causation is to be understood in terms of counterfactual dependence. We had a look at some of these counterexamples to the counterfactual theory. We've had a look at some counterexamples to the process theory as well. So we're going to leave causation now. We'll come back to causation when we get to time travel paradoxes, because time travel paradoxes involve the combination of reverse causation or retro causation and time, clearly. So we'll come back, but now we're going to move on to models of time, different ways of understanding how time might work in the universe. I will be looking at the scientific conception of time as well as the metaphysical conception of time, and they don't always agree, if indeed they agree at all. In fact, that's one of the weird and disconcerting things about current science, is that it tells us that most of the everyday beliefs we hold about time are false. So we'll have a look at some different models of time, and then over the course of the next 3 weeks, I think, I'll be digging into one particular model of time in particular. The reason I'm going to focus on that model of time is because it's flatly contrary to science, yet it's the thing that most of you probably believe. Okay? And so we're going to look at various problems with what I think of as the everyday or common sense picture of time. Okay? He said. Okay, so what I want to just start with, those of you who are in my philosophy of science course, I apologize for the overlap. I just want to start with some recent comments that have been made by some scientists about philosophy that are by no means nice, and offer you a diagnosis of at least a little bit of what's going on in the interplay between science and philosophy at the moment. Because I think a lot of it actually has to do with time and about a certain crisis that we have in our current best science at the moment over how we understand the nature of time. What you find is physicists like Stephen Hawking being very unfriendly to philosophy. It's hard to know what to make of some of these exchanges. So here we go. This is from Hawking. Almost all of us must sometimes wonder why are we here, where do we come from? Traditionally, these are questions for philosophy, but philosophy is dead. Philosophers have not kept up with modern developments in science, particularly physics. Now, Hawking is a sort of cosmologist, works in a lot of stuff in general relativity. A lot of what he's interested in is actually to do with time, right? And I think that when he makes this comment, he really is calling philosophers to task for their failure to understand recent developments in physics to do with time. You have this one from Lawrence Krauss, who says philosophy is a field that unfortunately reminds me of that old Woody Allen joke, those that can't do teach, and those that can't teach, teach Jim. It's really hard to understand what justifies it. I mean, this is a pretty public attack, right? So this is in Hawking's book. I think this was Lawrence Krauss in a public forum denouncing science. Both of these guys are sort of interested in large-scale cosmology and stuff that's really, at the end of the day, got a lot to do with how we understand time. So what's happening? Well, I mean, one thing that's really interesting is that there are other physicists who don't think that philosophy is useful. And I think that that's worth keeping in mind. Sorry, there are other physicists who don't think philosophy is useless. So George Ellis, Lee Smolin, Julian Barber, and Carlo Rovelli, these are all physicists of various kinds. Julian Barber is a very interesting physicist. He's never held an academic post as a physicist. He spent something like 50 years translating Russian novels into English, doing physics on the side. I mean, Einstein did it on the side as well, so for a while at least, when he was a patents clerk. So these guys, what's interesting about them is that they're all trying to understand time, the nature of time in the universe. They're all trying to do physics, and they're all saying that the physics is incomplete. The physics is missing something. And that to really understand time, we have to go back to philosophy to get a grip on our concept of time and how time relates to the physical universe. And so in all of these pictures, in one way or another, these guys are really returning to philosophical roots to try and overcome a crisis that is at the moment present in science. So what is the crisis? What we see is that our two best theories are inconsistent. So quantum theory and general relativity turn out to be flatly inconsistent with each other. But the way in which they turn out to be inconsistent has a lot to do with the notion of time. I don't want to imply that this is the only reason why these theories are inconsistent with one another, but it's certainly one source of the inconsistency. They actually have different concepts of time kicking around in them. It looks like quantum theory has a Newtonian conception of time, right? A notion of a sort of absolute temporal ordering in the universe, whereas general relativity has no use for such a conception of time. And because you've got these different conceptions of time, and because they're not just sort of like conceptually distinct, they're very mathematically incompatible with each other, these ways of treating time, you have these flat mathematical inconsistencies turning up in these theories. And I think that this conflict between the sort of notion of time that you have in quantum theory and the notion of time that you have in general relativity is actually indicative, or at least rooted in, a much deeper conflict which has been present in the philosophy of time since it's existed as a discipline. And the conflict is between our experience of the world and between what science seems to be telling us, right? Turns out that quantum theory very roughly lines up with a picture of time that's quite amenable to our experience of the world and our everyday notion of time, whereas general relativity just blows it out of the water, right? Okay, so on the side of common sense, right, sort of everyday notion of time that you probably believe, depends on how much physics you've done. Doing more physics tends to drum this out of people. But a lot of us think that there's something special about the present. There's something about now which is important, metaphysically speaking, compared to the past or the future, right? Time seems to us to flow. It seems as though we're traveling into the future at some speed, or if you like, that the present moment is moving into the future away from the past. I mean, there are different ways that this gets cashed out, and most of them are kind of metaphorical, because as it turns out, it's very difficult to make the conception of temporal flow coherent. It's actually sort of riddled by various inconsistencies once you try and sharpen it up. But you can get a handle on it metaphorically, right? It's like we're on a river flowing into the future, or it's like the events in the future are flowing towards us in the present and then flowing on into the past. So we have these two features of our common sense notion of time. Arguably, they're rooted in experience, right? It seems to us as though the present is special in a way that the past and future aren't special, kind of experientially. And it seems to us as though time flows. That seems to be part of our everyday experience of the world. So there you go. There's some pictures, if people think in pictures. The now doesn't spin, per se. That's just a representation of its specialness. The other side, we have science. And what special and general relativity tell us, I'm not going to go into the details, but you can just sort of learn about the upshots, tells us the present is not special. There's nothing special about this moment in time, right? It's just part of a much broader four-dimensional geometry in which there are lots of ways of carving up the sort of space of stuff that exists in terms of temporal orderings. There's nothing special about any particular way of carving, and nothing particularly special about any given slice, more generally. Yeah?
Is it possible that there are two separate things that both the time, the relative time, quantum time mechanics?
Is it possible that there's two different things called time, and these are sort of two different investigations of two different things? Look, maybe. I suppose that it depends on how unified you want your theory of reality to be. And if you would like to bring quantum theory and general relativity together to produce a sort of grand unified theory, then you're going to have to iron out this inconsistency. Having said that, some people do just sort of say, well, look, maybe the desire for a unified theory of reality is misplaced. It's wrong-headed to think that we could ever come up with a way of reconciling these two theories and a way of reconciling these two conceptions of time. That's sort of a meta debate that you have to have, right, about the notion of unification and what reason we have to think that we should expect a unified picture of reality, right? I think that most scientists think that ultimately there is going to be a unified story to tell, and probably most philosophers too. And so for the most part in these debates, people are, as a matter of fact, concerned to achieve such unity. But you could just refuse to, right? Also, time doesn't flow. There's no real way to make sense of this in general relativity. It's just like everything's out there already, past, present, and future. All that stuff's out there. There are ways of carving up the universe into different temporal orderings. But there's no sense in which there's some like glowing time that moves across the world, right? Like this metaphorical description. There's nothing that really locks onto in general relativity. Yeah.
If the picture is already present, does that mean the universe, according to special relativity, must be deterministic?
So it's not. So first, it's not present, right? It exists, but we don't want to say that it's present because under these kinds of views of temporal reality, present is just an indexical term, like now, right? It just refers to this time, right? But we don't want to say that the future is this time. We just want to say that the future exists. But to get to the meat of the question, does it imply determinism? Stay tuned. Okay, so why is it that you don't have these things in our best science? Well, here's a very, very rough account of what's going on. Turns out that what's present for you depends on how fast you're moving. So observers at different, in different inertial reference frames will make different judgments about the temporal ordering of events and about which events are simultaneous with them and which events aren't. And because they make these different judgments, and because there's no fact of the matter as to who's right about which judgments are made, right? So everyone's sort of on a par with respect to their judgments about the simultaneity of events. There's no sense in which you can say that one observer's observation of events is special, and so no sense in which you can pick out sort of one group of events, simultaneous events, as being metaphysically or physically special in any way. And also, the past, present, and future all exist, right? And once you've got that, it's sort of difficult to make sense of a moving present. Or some people try, and we'll get to that in a sec. Yeah? Things I do. Is that better? I mean, it's this little tabby bit. Is that making you sad? Because I don't think I can get rid of the little tabby bit. Okay. So, broadly speaking, there are two kinds of temporal theories. And we can differentiate between them along these lines. We can say that there are dynamic theories and static theories. Dynamic theories are ones that include some moving present, some notion of flow, right? So they typically have the specialness of the present and the motion of the present. Static theories, which are on the side of relativity and which contradict our sort of common sense picture of the world, think that there is no moving present, there's nothing special about the present. That's the sense in which they're static. Now keep in mind that the static theorist does not think that nothing changes, right? This isn't a story about whether or not there's change. The static theorist thinks there's change. They just think that change is very similar to something like spatial variation, right? So when, do we have anything that's spatially varied? Oh, you guys are spatially varied. So when you've got, I'm going to shine, close your eyes. Yeah. So you've got the head bit, right? I hope this doesn't burn through your skull and do something horrible to you. You got the head bit in space, and then you got the leg bits down there, and you got spatial variation across the full spatial extent of this three-dimensional object. Good, right? So, yes, I am. So he changes, right, across space. He's got different parts at different spatial locations, right? The static theorist thinks that change across time is like change across space. Insofar as things change, it's a matter of having different properties at different times. So things are sort of strung out in time like you're strung out in space, right? In fact, you are both strung out in time and strung out in space at the same time. Well, not at the same time. Together, right? You have both of those features. So they think that things change. It's just that change is not this, it's not change in virtue of having a present moving or in virtue of time flowing. It's just very similar to spatial change. And this sort of lines up with the general spatialization of time that you find in general relativity. What these theories typically do is treat time as a space-like dimension, right? I mean, it's got certain properties that mark it off from the other spatial purely spatial dimensions, but nevertheless, it has sort of a much more spatialized aspect to it than you find in time on a Newtonian conception. Yeah?
Under a static theory, is your question of persistence similar to your question of continuous, objects in three dimensions? Like,
Good, right. So is your theory of persistence similar to your theory of spatial extension? Yes, is the answer, right? So things are it's not just the case that the way things change in time is like the way things vary in space, but the way things persist through time is like the way that things persist through space, right? So close your eyes again. So you're persisting through space, right, by having a head bit there and a foot bit there. I presume there's feet under there. I actually don't know what's going on. You could be like Davros for all I know. And he's also going to have temporal parts, right? He's going to be extended. So imagine like a sequence of moments of this room, right? You're going to be extended through that sequence of moments like you're extended through space, right? That's how they think of persistence. Yeah?
I had a good example of it when if a three-dimensional person was moving through someone who's going to be the second dimension, you'd see them as a, like you see them as being sliced in bits,
Yep.
kind of thing, whereas if you saw someone moving through the fourth dimension from a third-dimensional person's perspective like us, you'd see them go from older to younger.
Yeah.
Each of their fourth-dimensional slices is stayed in their life.
Yeah, that's right. So it is sort of like slicing an object, a three-dimensional object sliced into two dimensions, four-dimensional object sliced into three dimensions. It's just that the fourth dimension is not a spatial one, so the relevant slices like differ in a way that they don't necessarily differ in the 2D case. I saw an interesting example of this when I was riding my bike home by the river. I saw a sequence of swans that was a sort of spatial example of a single swan in time. So it was an adult swan, then a juvenile swan, then a less old swan, and then like a baby swan at the end, and they were all in a line going along like this. It was like a perduring, which is how we think of the notion of persistence that we're talking about is perdurance. Sorry. The swans were like a perduring object, or an object that persists in time, like in these views. Should have taken a photo. Would have been good. Okay, so now I'm going to go through different dynamic theories of time. There's at least 4, and they differ over their various ontological commitments, right? So what they think exists. So this is the first beast that we'll meet. This is the moving spotlight theory of time. It's called the moving spotlight theory of time because, again, this is metaphorical, but they believe that the past, present, and future all exist, right? But they nevertheless think that there's a temporal flow. So what they think is that the present is like a spotlight moving across a wall, right? It's this sort of glowing, I don't think it literally glows, but it's this sort of glowing thing that moves through time from the beginning of the universe to the end of the universe. Nevertheless, they think it all exists, right? It's very difficult to explain these views without couching them in metaphor because as soon as you, as I said, as soon as you start to try and render it precise, you actually hit a whole bunch of paradoxes. So I'm just going to keep it at the metaphorical level for now. So they think the present's special, and they think that the present moves through time like a spotlight moving across a wall, hence moving spotlight theory. Okay, so to your question before, right? If the future exists, is determinism true? And if determinism is true, do we have free will? Right? I take it that that's where that line of questioning was going. Yeah. So these guys do face a problem here. I'm not personally particularly convinced by the problem, but many people do find this to be a pressing concern for these sorts of views. So the problem is, look, if the future exists, if your future part's already out there in time doing whatever it is that your future parts do, I don't know what you guys get up to on the weekend, then you might wonder how it is that you could choose to do otherwise, right? I mean, if they're already out there existing, it looks like it's already set in stone. So how could you, how could you make it the case that those things don't come about? Right? So there are actually two aspects here. One of them is the determinism aspect, right? Determinism is the thesis about the laws of nature. If the laws of nature are deterministic, then from a given slice or a different region in the world that's a full description in some sense, you can extrapolate the rest, right? And then you've got free will in here. And there's a sort of traditional problem about reconciling determinism and free will. The question here is whether the existence of the future brings about a similar kind of problem. I don't think it does, because although the future exists, it exists in virtue of causal interactions with stuff that's happening now. So the choices we make the future that way, right? So in virtue of it being a result of the choices we make, then it's like a result of the free choices we make. I just don't see that there's an inconsistency there. But nevertheless, it's perfectly reasonable to think that there's a problem here, and many people do. Yeah? Yeah, that's a useful way of thinking about it. So, I mean, I take it that the branching is just a way of bringing out the issue here. You're not talking about a sort of branching picture of time. But it is, if you think of sort of continuous chains of causation, then sort of dropping a chunk of the chain might undercut the causal relationship between the first and the last member. And in these worlds, you do have all these causal chains leading away from our actions and our choices. Yeah?
I just find the way you describe, our free choices now affect how it's going to be, but that's already chosen, makes it sound less free.
I know it makes it sound less free. Like, I'm perfectly willing to concede that it sounds like you don't have free choice. I think we're just wrong to think that we don't have free choice, right? If I can causally make something happen, right, and I'm free to have chosen to do otherwise, then I think I've got free choice. People deny that, right? People think that you need something much stronger to understand free will, and I just don't think you do. But look, I don't have an argument for that, and I don't want to say that you can't hold that view, right? It's definitely a coherent position. Is there a no? Okay, so that first one was moving spotlight theory. Here's a way to get around this sort of free will determinism type issue, right? Get rid of the future, right? If the existence of the future is the thing that worries you, then let's just rub it out, okay? Let's just get rid of the troublesome things like sentient robots that are probably going to kill us all. So this view is called the growing block theory of time. And the growing block theory, or sometimes pejoratively, the growing salami view of time. This view of time holds that as time passes, the sum total of things that exists grows and increases in number, right? So think of it as a series of slices, right? You start with the first slice of the salami, and then as another moment passes, you add a slice, and then you add a slice, and then you add a slice, and you keep adding slices. But the past slices stay in existence, right? It's just that the future never exists. The future comes into existence as time passes. Called the growing block theory of time for obvious reasons. Again, we've got a pictorial representation of this. This is the block growing from the Big Bang to the Big Crunch through the Middle Ages and whatever's going on down there. Okay, so do we have freedom? Maybe we do, right? It looks like if you're, here at the leading edge of the block, then your future actions are not set in stone, right? So it looks like you have the kind of free choice that maybe you want to have. But is that right? So think about, this will lead to a deeper problem with these views later on, but think about as the edge of the block moves to here, what happens for this person who exists here, right? So this person who exists here in the Middle Ages after the blocks moved on, right, their future exists. It's only if you're at the leading edge of the block that you get to have a non-existent future. As the block goes by and you're sort of set in the salami, right, you no longer have, you then from then on have an existing future. So the entire life of some people is captured within the block once the present moves on. And so you might think that for them, they don't genuinely have free choice, if that's the kind of free choice that you want. It looks like the problem is reconstructed in a small form for any partitioning of the block. Yeah?
It sort of seems to suggest that there's sort of possibly two different versions of what we mean by time, is one being a sort of spatial version and one being a sort of experiential aspect to your life. Like, because if we take a person from the Roman Empire, they're only going to experience the present. So they're never going to experience their past or their future, and once they die, they no longer exist, at least in an experiential sense.
Right.
So they're never going to face this problem that you're highlighting there from an experiential sense. On the other hand, from a spatial sense, I can understand the problem that you're looking at.
Yeah, I kind of see what you're getting at, yeah. Yeah, maybe if you want to, when you're pulling apart these two different conceptions of time, put one into the sort of subject experience mode and the other one in sort of the out there in reality mode. And from anyone's perspective, it's true that they don't sort of experience their future events, right? So the future is going to be a surprise for them, experientially. And they never experience their past. But still, their futures are determined. So, insofar as they exist, right? So, but they just don't experience them as such, right? It depends on how much comfort that is for you, right? If they're sort of set in stone when you look back from this spatial perspective, some people might think that they're just set in stone, right? And so even though the person experiences it as being undetermined and sort of genuinely open, they're just wrong. And you might worry that they're wrong about having, about whether they think they've got free choice. Yep.
Doesn't that kind of go against the notion of a special present?
No, the special present here. Well, okay, interesting question. I'll come to this in a sec. I won't give the game away because this is a fun problem for this view. But see the leading edge? That is the special present, right? That's what they think. Okay. Then you've got a question about once the present's over here, what are these people supposed to think? They're not special anymore, but they believe they're special as much as you do when you're on the edge of the block. We'll come back to that. Okay, third view. Third view. Branch attrition. This is by far the weirdest view, I think. It's defended by exactly one person in the world, as far as I know. He is a real live academic, though, so I guess that makes it a thing. So on the branch attrition view, you have... so here's the present, and what you've got are multiple branching futures. And all of the branching futures exist from the perspective of the present, right? So these are all different branches and different possible ways that the future might go. But they're all actually connected in space and time to here. And then as the present moves on, past a branch, and it picks a direction, the branches fall off. Not just do the branches fall off, but once the present has passed a node in the tree and gotten rid of some branches, this guy, Storrs McCall, claims that the branches never existed. That might sound paradoxical to you. I think it probably is, but that's his view. Yeah?
You can say that the future doesn't exist. Could you say that the past doesn't exist either?
Could you say that the past doesn't exist either if you say that the future doesn't exist? Yes. The question is, why would you want to? Now, I'm not saying I'm not saying you don't want to, or that you can't come up with reasons to want to, but I think you probably need some reasons to want to. As a matter of fact, that view is also defended by exactly two people in the world. I think they call it the shrinking block view, right? So you have the future and the present existing, but the past doesn't exist, and the universe gets smaller as time goes on. Philosophers. Okay, so one thing that's interesting about this view is that you kind of get some of the freedom that you might have liked, even though you've got an existing future. Because all the branches exist, and because they all have different possible actions that you might take, and all of the possible actions exist, and then as the present moves on, it's knocking branches off and sort of making the choices determined, whatever that means, then you might think that there's sort of a freedom of choice here that is similar to the kind of freedom of choice you have a growing block view, except without having to just rub out the future. Yeah?
So this is violating the law of non-contradiction in the way that you're saying they have existed,
Does it seem like it's violating the law of non-contradiction when you say they have existed? Well, I mean, they exist, and then they never had existed, or they never existed. Yeah, no, I know that's what I said, and that's his view. Does it violate the law of non-contradiction? Sure looks like it violates it to me.
Can you get around that with the whole idea that there are multiple universes, and every time you make a choice, they sort of split off into various different paths, so they do...
Yeah, look, so, I mean, the problem is not with the branching, right? So you don't even need the multiple universes to make sense of branching. You can introduce multiple universes to model branching if you want, and in fact, the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics is actually in the ballpark of this, except that it doesn't have the branch attrition. The weird thing is the branch attrition and how he characterizes that. The idea that once the presence moved on, these things never existed just seems a bit weird, right? But that's the view. The question is whether you can modify the view to make it a bit less silly, right? One of the ways you could modify it is to say that, you know, the present moves on, but the branches keep existing.
Is there any advantage in making the branches go away?
Yeah, why does he want to make the branches go away?
He doesn't want to have multiple features existing at the same.
I think he wants it to be genuinely dynamic, right? He wants the world to be genuine, like to have this sort of aspect of flow. And he actually defines temporal flow in terms of the branch attrition, right? He says that what it is for time to flow is for branches to fall off, right? So it's like in the growing block view where he defines the people define the flow of time in terms of things coming into existence, and that's why you've got that sort of aspect to it. Similarly with the branch attrition view, you've got that sort of falling off aspect to model the flow of time. Okay, cool. All right, so to the fun question that you asked before about growing block theories. In fact, this works for moving spotlight theories, works for branch attrition theories, works for any theory that includes the existence of the past, present, and future, and a special present. So what's the problem? So these are two different people. This person exists, this is Caesar crossing the Rubicon. That's the thing he did. Well, he was white, so I got that bit right. And this is some person in the 2013 federal election. Sorry, that was... I did have a more exciting reference in there, but someone read my slides and was like, they're not going to get it. It was to do with Firefly. Okay, so this person is in, I don't know, BC sometime. I don't really know when Caesar crossed the Rubicon. I'm not a historian. And he's thinking to himself as he's crossing the Rubicon, I am present, right? He has the full sort of experience of being present, right? And he does. Once the block's moved on, he's come into existence, he's crossed the Rubicon, but he stays in existence. And he continues to have the same experiences while he's out there in the past, right? Okay, good. Now here you are, watching the 2013 federal election, or watching Firefly again for the 20th time. Because they only made one season, right? What else are you going to watch? So there he is, there you are, watching the 2013 federal election, and you're thinking to yourself, I am present, right? You're having the full-blown experience of being present. Now, when the block's here, right, for Caesar, his views about the present line up with where the special present is, right, while the leading edge is there. But when the leading edge moves on, right, the present is over here, and he's still thinking that he's present, right? Similarly, when the leading edge is here for you, you think you're present, and then as time moves on, the special present is no longer there. So what are we to make of this? One thing is that you can never know that you're present. Why can you never know that you're present? Well, actually, you should conclude that you're not present. You're not objectively present. You're not in the special leading edge of the block. Because there's only one time that is ever the leading edge of the block. There's only one time that is ever metaphysically special in that sense, right? So probabilistically speaking, it's extremely unlikely for you to be in that one time. You're far more likely to be out here in the past that's already settled, right? So you should rationally conclude that you're in the past. Okay? And worse than that, no one can ever know that they're present, right? Because you just don't have the right observational evidence to make that judgment. Yeah?
Could you not say that if you're attributing some sort of specialness to the present, you could say that the present is the only time you have experience?
Good, right. So this is actually a response. So one of the responses that people make to this kind of objection is to zombify the past. or it's called the past is dead hypothesis. That's a philosophical joke. Don't worry. What they say is that as the present moves, so goes experience with it, right? And if the experience goes with the present, then Caesar's out there in the past. He doesn't, once the present's moved on, he doesn't have the experience of being present anymore. He doesn't have any experiences. He's a zombie. But he's still doing everything that Caesar used to do. So he's still crossing the Rubicon. He's still... Shit, I don't know. What else did Caesar do? Got stabbed. He's still getting stabbed. He's still like, et tu, Brute? And yet he's a zombie. Right? That avoids the problem. Right? Definitely avoids the problem. But at what cost? Okay? Zombies, right? A universe overwhelmingly full of zombies, right? Because there's only one time at which there are no zombies, right? So you should conclude that you're probably not at that time. Maybe you should think you're a zombie. But you can't, I know, right? So that's how it gets around the problem, right? You can't, because you can't think you're a zombie, but still it's weird. Okay, so this will hit the moving spotlight view, it'll hit the branch attrition view, it'll hit the growing block view. It won't hit this view, presentism. So presentism is the view that is claimed to be the common sense model of time, right? This is the view that people claim is in your head right now until you've learnt about some other stuff. So on the presentist view, the past doesn't exist, the future doesn't exist, all that exists is the present. But the present constantly updates, it constantly changes, right? So, yeah, that's what they think. Cool. It avoids this problem, this sort of epistemic problem about knowing when you're present, right? If you can know that you exist, you know that you're present, right? And Descartes taught us that we can at least know that we exist, right? So if presentism is true and the past and the future don't exist, you can't fail to be right about whether or not you're objectively present because, you would not exist if you weren't. But it has a range of other problems that it faces. Here's a brief list that we will go through in more detail in coming weeks. First problem, the truth maker objection. If claims about the past are true, and truth depends on being, and the past doesn't exist, then how can claims about the past be true? Right? So truth depends on being, so that you're wearing a white t-shirt depends on the fact that you're wearing a white t-shirt, right? So the proposition you're wearing a white t-shirt depends on the fact that you're wearing a white t-shirt, so truth depends on being. Claims about the past are true, right? Caesar crossed the Rubicon, we all know that. The past doesn't exist. So on what do claims about the past depend? They can't depend on things like your white shirt, because your white shirt doesn't exist in the past, right? Well, probably did exist, but it doesn't exist now, okay? So this is called the truth maker objection. How do we provide some ontological foundations to make claims about the past true, given that the past doesn't exist? Let me get through the objections, then I'll get to you, Matthew. Are you laughing at my PowerPoint? Oh, okay. That's all right. If it was my PowerPoint, dude. Okay, so the second problem of relations. Most clear version of it is the causal problem, right? If the past doesn't exist, and only the present exists, and past things are causing present things, how is it that they do it, given that they don't exist? Right? You can think of this more generally in terms of relations, right? So causation is a relation between present things and past things. It seems reasonable to suppose that relations are existence entailing. If X and Y are related by some relation R, then both X and Y have to exist, right? So if Caesar's crossing the Rubicon causes us all to jump for joy, then there should be some causal relation connecting us with Caesar, right? But if there is a causal relation and the past doesn't exist, then how can there be any such causal relation, right? The non-existence of the past seems to take with it all of causation, and indeed any relation between the present and the past. Third problem. This is a little bit unfair because all versions of the dynamic theory of time run headlong into relativity, but presentism seems to suffer the worst from the clash. Why does presentism suffer the worst? Well, what's present depends on how fast you're moving. The presentist says that only the present exists, and we all know that different observers are going to disagree over what is present, so different observers are going to disagree over what exists. And there's no way to solve the disagreement. So you know that view that you probably held when you're a first-year undergraduate that hopefully your philosophy tutor beat out of you with a long stick? That, you know, what's real for me is what's real for you, man. That view. That's actually what presentism, once you combine it with relativity, gives you. It gives you a massively fragmented ontology where existence is connected not just to observation and to observers, but to motion. So how fast you've got, if you change your motion, then different things will exist for you. Seems bad, right? Okay, finally, static theories. So those are the dynamic theories. Over the next 3 weeks, we're going to look at those 3 problems for presentism in more detail. I'll map out the problems and tell you how the presentist tries to solve them, in case you're interested. This is the eternalist view. So the eternalist thinks that past, present, and future all exist. There is no moving present. There is no special present. There's just sort of nothing metaphysically special about time in that way. You just have basically all of these different orderings that are combined into a 4-dimensional manifold. Advantages of eternalism. It's fully relativistic. That's good. It faces no truth-maker problems, and it faces no problems of relations, and it does not suffer from that epistemic problem that dynamic theories faced. Why? Because they don't believe in a special present. All they think being present is an indexical notion, namely being simultaneous with this time, or being simultaneous with this utterance, or something along those lines. And we all know very well that we're present in that sense, and you can't really fail to be present in that sense, like indexically present. So they don't face these kinds of epistemic problems. Yes?
Could you argue that the experience of the flowing present is a purely experiential thing rather than a...
Yeah. So that's what these guys say, right? So these guys say that the experience of the temporal flow is just an experience. It has no reality in the world, okay? So these are the advantages. The disadvantage with eternalism is you have to say that, right? And once you say that, you have to explain why it is that we all seem to experience flow when, in fact, there is no such thing. Why it is that we're all subject to a massive illusion of that magnitude, right? And it's an illusion quite unlike any other illusion that we've catalogued in psychology, because most of those illusions can be broken, right? And we can work out the mechanism by which the illusion operates. In this case, we can't break the illusion, obviously, and we have no sense of how the mechanism that underpins the illusion works. Okay, and lastly, Matthew, what was your question?
In terms of the past things doing causal work,
Yep.
how do you just say they did causal work when the present was back then?
Can you say that they did causal work when the present was back then? You can say that, and what you end up doing is collapsing the problem of causation into the truth-maker problem, but you've still got to solve the truth-maker problem. So you've still got to say, on what basis is it true that things did causal work when they were present, right? Also, there are some models of causation on which it's even going to be hard to say that, but we'll get into that once we have a bit of a closer look at the different problems for presentism over the next few weeks. Okay, thanks, guys. Yeah, there's a little bit. There's sort of a bit of general stuff on branching spacetimes, which is sort of branching throughout, which sort of implies that they're branching in time as well. I mean, any sort of issues to do with branching generally, right? Yeah, I don't think it plays any special role in that branching part. But yeah, people are about that. If you're interested in it, I think on the have a look at the reference list. I think there's some stuff on there. If not, I can send you some references to pages and that kind of stuff. Cool, man. That's good. You failed to understand the static theory. In what way did you fail to understand it?
I don't understand everything. It's like static
Solve the problem. So causation is one of the static